I spent the last 2 years learning game development completely from scratch. In this video, I'm gonna show you all the games I made, I'll tell you all about how I started, I'll tell you what difficulties I had to face, and I'll even tell you about the time my game got featured in Steam's front page. This is gonna be a longer video than the ones I usually make because I have a lot of stuff to talk about, but don't worry, there are timestamps in the description so you can skip to the parts that you prefer. Also, feel free to subscribe and turn on the notifications if you'd like to stay updated on my new videos, and make sure to leave a comment sharing your story with game development because I would love to open a conversation about this topic in the comments. My story starts at the beginning of 2020. Back then, many countries, including Italy, which is where I live, imposed lockdowns in order to prevent the spread of the virus, which meant that I had a lot of unexpected free time but nothing to do with it, other than sitting around the house doing nothing. So to give my lifestyle a twist, I started googling for stuff to learn about. And I'm not being vague here, I was actually looking for random topics to study. Long story short, I found an e-learning platform called Udemy where you can get courses about pretty much anything at a very convenient price. And after some browsing, I ended up buying a course about iOS app development. Keep in mind, I didn't have any prior knowledge with programming or development whatsoever, and I didn't even know that I wanted to make games. I only bought this course because I saw it had a lot of positive reviews and it was beginner friendly, so my dumb consumerist monkey brain told me to buy it. And this course was really great. I learned a lot of things thanks to it. I started programming in Swift, which is the language used by iOS. I learned how to use Xcode, how to read documentation, how to fix bugs, all very useful skills that I would use later on in the next 2 years. But as I was progressing with the course, one thing was becoming more and more evident. Making apps is so boring. I realized that I didn't want to make apps, I wanted to make video games, and so I started doing that. But not in Unity, not in Unreal, not in Godot, not in any game engine really. I started making games in Xcode. I really want you to understand how stupid I was. I was developing games in a software meant for iOS apps. It's the equivalent of cooking an egg out in the sun instead of using a cooking pan. Technically, you can do that, but why? Eventually, however, I did find out about game engines, so I downloaded Unity and I bought another course, this time specifically meant for game development. And let me tell you, this course from these guys at Game Dev TV taught me so much stuff with this. I have watched hundreds of lessons, maybe even thousands. I ended up buying most of their courses and I even went to an episode of their podcast, but don't watch it cause it's cringe. And as I was learning the basics of Unity and as I was starting to create my very first games, I also discovered some amazing YouTube game dev channels that I still follow to this day, such as Danny, Brakis, Jonas Tyroller, Blackthorn Prod, Code Monkey, Thomas Brush, and I was completely caught off guard by the sheer amount of content I could find on YouTube, whether it was for entertainment purposes like devlogs or educational ones like tutorials. I realized there was a huge global community of people who were as passionate as I was about this particular topic. During a time in which a deadly pandemic was taking over the world, I found it very reassuring to have a nice little place online where I could share my creativity with others and keep my mind off all the horrible stuff that was happening outside in the real world. And in a certain way, I think this made me and all of us feel less alone. Alright, let's talk about my games. In this video, I'm not gonna talk about prototypes or random game ideas, I'm only gonna talk about the projects that I completed and that I published on at least one distribution platform. The first complete game I've ever made and released is called Blackjack Shooter. This is still available on the Play Store for free. It is a space shooter where you shoot blackjack cards instead of spaceships. I remember that I made it while I was following the part of the Udemy course about making a simple top-down space shooter. I followed the lessons step by step, but I wanted to give this project my own twist to it, so I downloaded the free casino pack by Kenny and I decided to switch all the spaceship with poker cards. Despite this being my first game, I'm actually very proud of it. Don't get me wrong, the controls are bad, the gameplay is barely decent, the code is not optimized like at all, but I still think it's a cool game. Probably because I am emotionally attached to it, but also because I think it has some character and because the idea behind it is unique, even if the execution may be a bit poor. My second game was Planet Plane. I made this using the homonymous asset that I bought on the Unity asset store for a couple of dollars. It's a high score based endless runner in which the player controls a plane that flies on limited fuel. The objective of the game is to get coins and avoid bombs in order to fly as further as possible. When the plane eventually runs out of fuel, it will inevitably crash to the ground, opening a game over screen that tells your high score. This is definitely not my most fleshed out game, but developing it taught me a lot of things, like making a parallax effect to simulate depth in a 2D environment, spawning game objects in an infinite loop, storing game data with player prefs, working with sliders, recognizing a color palette, and more. Oh, and you can even find the gameplay footage still here on this YouTube channel. At this point, I think it was July 2020, I found out about game jams, which, in case you don't know, are sort of marathons between game developers where the objective is to make a game in a limited amount of time following a specific theme. The first game jam I participated to was the TryJam 86. For this jam I made Starcatcher, a game about an astronaut called Holden who wants to catch all the stars in the universe. Since I had to make this game in only 3 hours, I remember that I reused a bunch of code and mechanics that I had already made for Planet Plane. In Starcatcher, in fact, the oxygen slider, the high score system, and the overall gameplay loop work exactly like the ones in Planet Plane. The main difference is that this game had a tiny bit of story attached to it. The main menu tells you about Holden, who as a kid always dreamed to become an astronaut in order to catch all the stars in the universe, and now that he finally became one, it's up to the player to make his dream come true. What I remember the most about the development is how much fun I had working with a space environment, which may be the reason why I ended up making lots and lots of games set in outer space after this one. And now in 2022 I'm actually remaking Starcatcher for mobile, but I will make a video about that in the future, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. Then I made Spider Killer, which is the first 3D project I've ever released. It's a fast-paced first-person shooter where the player has to clear a building infected by giant spiders. The building has 10 floors, which make up a total of 10 levels. I created all of them using ProBuilder and the SnapSurface package that I found on the Unity Asset Store. This may not sound like much, but I remembered that this took me a lot of time and effort. Creating this game taught me a lot of things about level design, level progression, and generally how to work in a 3D environment. Of course, it also had a lot of bugs and specific problems that I could talk about for hours, but I am not going to because I already made an entire video where I analyze in depth the development of Spider Killer, so feel free to watch that. Later on, I went back to Unity 2D to create Homyatol Un Destino Modificato, a fan game dedicated to a very popular Italian streamer, who actually ended up playing it while live streaming on Twitch for thousands of viewers. His gameplay video is still out on YouTube. It's in Italian, so I doubt you'll understand it, but I'll leave a link in the description in case you want to watch it. This is a 2D story-based action platformer, while all the characters are based off real Italian content creators that I am a big fan of. There is melee combat, some very easy puzzles, and even an honest-to-God dialogue system, which are all features that I was implementing for the first time. Aside from the technical aspects, I remember that I had a lot of fun making this, and that watching somebody play your game while live streaming was a really unique experience. I should also point out that this game got a good amount of downloads and lots of positive reviews on the Play Store, but I think most of them come from other fans of this particular Italian streamer, so they might have been a bit too generous. Then I remembered about game jams, so I participated to a new one, ready to show off my brand new skills with Unity 3D, and I made this mess called Zombie City. The title is pretty self-explanatory. You're in a city full of zombies and you have to shoot them in the face. That's very simple. Now this would be a fun game, if only it did not run at 2 frames per second. Look at this. Do you see this? Do you realize that I thought this was okay? This project is a mess and I don't even want to talk about it, but at least it made me learn about performance issues, optimizing code, and using the profiler tool in Unity. I had to learn it the hard way, but I learned. Following the release of Zombie City, I decided that I was finally ready to take on my biggest challenge yet, working on my first commercial game to release on Steam. This is how I started working on L.S.D, a first-person shooter entirely set during a hallucinogen trip. I spent about 3 or 4 months working on a 15-minute demo, which I released on April 7th, 2021 on Steam for free, and despite this being my very first Steam release, it did extremely well. The demo, which I released as its own app, got featured on the homepage and it stayed at the top of the new and trending section for about a week. In total, the demo page got 14.89 million of impressions, over 800,000 visits, and almost 15,500 lifetime unique users. The prologue was also given the very positive review tag and it currently has about 200 positive ratings. Now, keep in mind, I did not market this game at all, and I did not have a strong following or even an online presence. I didn't spend any money running ads or posting GIFs on Reddit or anything like that. So how did this happen? Well, for starters, I think I got very lucky, because tons of games get released on Steam every day, possibly way better than mine, and very few of them ever get such a big recognition. But I also think that the title, the visuals, and the trailer did most of the work. I believe casual gamers saw a 3D open world with guns and a unique premise, they saw it was free, and they just downloaded it without putting too much thought into it. Now, in case you're thinking, oh, you must have made so much money from this, you must be swimming in gold while wiping your butt with $100 bills, remember, I'm talking about the demo, which is free, so I didn't make any money off of it. The complete version of the game is still currently in development and it's gonna take me a long time to finish. That is mostly because I'm working on this project alone, but also because I want it to be a good quality game that is very polished and that doesn't feel like a rushed asset flip. I learned so much stuff while developing this game, I could talk about it for hours and hours, but I'm not going to. I'll probably make a video dedicated exclusively to it sometime in the future, so wait for that. After this crazy experience with L.S.D, the game, not the drugs, don't do drugs, I felt very tired of working with this project, so I decided to take a break from it to start a brand new one. This ended up being published on Steam as well with the title A Day in Space. It is a first-person interactive exploration game where you live a day on board of a space colony in 2040. It is story-based, it's relatively short, it only lasts for about an hour, and it took me about 3 months to make. If my previous game did extremely well, this one definitely did not. Don't get me wrong, some people played it and even left positive reviews, but I knew when I released it, it wasn't going to have the same amount of downloads as L.S.D. Mostly because it had much less wishlists, but also because from a marketing point of view, the store page wasn't very captivating. Nonetheless, I am very proud of this project for many reasons. First of all, it's a complete commercial functioning game that's released on a distribution platform, and that alone, in my opinion, is something to be proud of. Secondly, this game taught me a lot about game design, and especially about environmental storytelling, which, according to Google, is the art of arranging a careful selection of the objects available in a game world so that they suggest a story to the player who sees them. Basically, A Day in Space has its own lore. It's full of collectibles that can be found while exploring the spaceship, there are unique dialogues that the player can read only under certain conditions, and there are even a couple of secret endings. Of course, this game isn't perfect by any means, and it also got some fair and constructive criticism, which I always appreciate, but in general, I am very proud of it. After the release of A Day in Space, I took a month-long break from game dev. This might not sound like a lot of time, but it was to me, especially considering that I had been working non-stop for many months on my last 2 projects. Taking some time off also led me to the decision to start uploading devlogs on YouTube, both because I thought it would be fun to experiment in a new field, but also because I wanted to start building an online community of people interested in my projects. With this in mind, I participated to a new game jam and I created Trick or Trick, a 2D project where the protagonist is a hooligan who wants to trash his neighbor's house for Halloween. I developed this game mostly because I wanted to make a devlog about it, and I did, but I never published it here because it was very boring and generic. I remembered that it was November 2021 and I decided that if I was gonna ever publish videos on YouTube, I would not make those generic devlogs copying the big creators that I see everywhere. I wanted to create content that was unique and that I was genuinely proud of. And that brings us to today. I made a lot of small weird games in the last few months. I made one about my dog, one about a banana, one about Will Smith and Chris Rock. I made a meme that got way more views than it should have, but I'm not gonna talk about this at all because it's all very recent and you can check out the devlogs by yourselves. So in conclusion, making games is fun, YouTube is cool, and drugs are bad. If you watched the whole video and you're still here, then I have one final, very important message for you. And that is, thank you for giving me watch time.